I am not sure about the secret sauce. I just think that Bollywood is too content starved and they're having a famine of sorts when it comes to good material, good stories. And maybe in 25 years, by fluke, I have done some good work which they feel is worth taking to the screen. Baki, I don't know if there's any other secret to this.
But the kind of stories that you're writing or you're picking, because you have a past history of journalism and a lot of good work, is there any reason why you're picking these stories that you think is possibility of getting adapted, or how do you pick and
See,
choose?
I have, I think, answered this question once earlier that in journalism there was one basic principle that you should always work for page one. You should not, I mean, whoever works for a feature page or inside stories is a journalist who's very lazy. I mean, I would say that. A real news reporter, I'm not talking about feature journalists, please don't get offended, those journalist friends who are here. If you want to be really become known, famous, you should work for page one. That to the top of the page, a flyer kind of thing, a headline. Only then you become a journalist worth your salt. So I was working for those kind of stories. Now at that time, in 1995, 96, I mean, years after bomb blast, I had no clue that these stories will be archived. People will come back to these stories and they would like to adapt it and make their own kind of series or movies or whatever. सो आफ्टर 25 years लगा किसान जिसने पहले खेती की होगी साल 2 साल पहले और फिर सडनली वो उसकी फसल देख करके उसकी कटाई करके बेचने लगता है आई रियलाइज इट्स something which happened totally by I won't say my luck, but well, God was gracious to me.
So खेती अच्छी कमा रही है, आपने बहुत मेहनत की है पहले. Sid, you have a new release. Correct me if I'm wrong. तुमसे ना हो पाएगा. That started out as a book, I think, because the author's name is also there. If you can give us a brief history of how it happened, why did you guys pick the book? What is the story behind it?
Yeah, so it is based on a book called How I Braved Anu Auntie and Co-Founded a $1 Million Company, written by Varun Agarwal, really, really talented writer. So actually, Nitesh Tiwari and I were making Dangal at that time, and we both happened to read the book at the same time. It's one of those uh, 2-3 hour reads, quick reads when you're looking to de-stress, just sort of pick up a fun book and read it. And we both got chatting and we said, there's this really fun book that we read and we hadn't realized that the other was reading it at the same time. And we said, listen, this is like ripe material for a book to be turned to the screen. And, we sort of got in touch with Varun and he was, of course, thrilled for, the fact that it could be, that his book could be converted to a film. And we just found it really relevant. I mean, when it's out on Friday, so you'll all see it, but really relevant to the youth of today, not taking itself too seriously, really irreverent, but at the same time talking about what you keep thinking, regarding the idea of what people are talking about, what you're doing, the judgments that you face from family, from friends, from peers, from colleagues when you want to do something different. You don't want to be Zuckerberg, you just want to set up your own little company and be happy and not have to answer to someone as a boss. So it's really about simple things like that. And we just found it really a fun, breezy read and something really relevant. So that's the reason we made it.
Right. A question a lot of publishers and authors keep asking that how do you make sure that the book is landed on your table, it gets your attention? So, I mean, what happened? Do you remember? Is it coincidence? Is it luck? Or somebody suggested or your team had read? What?
So this was serendipity because I was giving some talk at IIM Lucknow and I happened to be leaving the stage and Varun happened to be giving a talk and walking towards the stage and he handed me this book literally while we passed each other in the aisle. And I read it on the way back, on the flight back from Lucknow. So those are things that just tend to happen by chance, right?
Okay, guys, hand your book. Whenever Sid is leaving, he can carry a pile.
But so that really worked as a random, serendipitous occurrence. But that's not, you can't structure a whole plan around things like that happening. So, I mean, what our team does, and I'm sure what your team does at Dharma is that, you have a whole lot of books coming into you. So there's someone who does the coverage for that and, reads through it and then is able to sort of identify whether that's something that should be adapted or not. But yes, it is a lot of incoming material considering you've got screenplays and treatments, etc. to read. And a book can tend to be much more daunting than that because it's a longer read. And therefore, I'm sure a lot of things fall through the cracks, right? A lot of very, very interesting material falls through the cracks. So it's great to have platforms like this where you have a meeting of minds between, the world of literature and the world of filmmaking where you can get together and spend these few days like sort of talking about it. Because otherwise, I'm sure there are lots of very eminently like sort of important books that we're all missing out on.
Right. And nowadays, I think publishers, authors, they themselves write the coverage. कि आप देख लो पहले coverage ही देख लो किताब पढ़ने की
Which
जरूरत
makes sense, right? Because they know that they're saving you that time and effort.
Yeah. So Shriram has a film we all are excited about. I know he can't reveal much about it, which is upcoming, but I know it's based on or adapted by a book, novel, story. If you can briefly tell us, Shriram, what got your attention or how it landed on your table? What is the, how did it happen?
I mean, see, what happens is, I also try to write my own stories, but they take time. Sometimes you get stuck at some point, you're not able to move ahead. So I find adapting a book a far more easier sort of a thing, because the basic material, the kernel or the premise is strong enough. I mean, if it attracts me, then the rest is my work. But at least I know I'm not inventing things. So I read a lot as much as I can. And so sometimes you come across a story which you say, okay, this is interesting. Out of 20, 30, 50, you kind of go through. And so this was one of those cases. It was a novel, and I can't reveal the name now, but it's there in the titles, in the film titles is there. We have taken the rights and all that. And then you sort of what did I like about the thing? That is there, of course, but the film also has to work on people who have read the story. So you try and see what you do without disturbing the essence of the book, what you really liked about it.
So someone told you about the book. How did you chance upon that?
No, I do my own I have a sort of me and couple of friends of mine, we just keep, it's all sort of, you go and check out what is being published and what is there. And these are, some of them are old books. Sometimes you just look at a revival of some old book and so on. So I do a lot of research trying to find stories.
I'll be looking into my mobile, it should not look rude, but my questions are here, so don't take it otherwise. But Shriram, also, the other films that you have done, Andhadhun was from a short film. Before that, your other films that have been also adapted from other stories.
Badlapur
was of course
yeah,
Italian.
yeah.
Indian stories you're not finding interesting. You're doing French, you're doing Italian. What's the reason? Where are we lacking?
Well, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है. I mean, just yesterday I watched Guide, which is one of the great Indian adaptations. So it's not like that. Like, there are so many good films here also, and so many of, so many of his books have been done. In fact, Mafia Queens, I wanted to. There's a ye story gaya. Like
I think everyone
it
has
was like
chased
that,
Mafia Queen in this.
Yeah. So then also, Vikas Swarup's first book, Q&A.
Yeah.
So I was in a bookshop and I bought the book, and I read it that night and I loved it so much. And next morning there was in midday or somewhere, he's going to release the book in Kemp's Corner crossword. So I rushed there, met him, and he said, "Oh, sorry, the rights are already gone with some. It's already sold, pre-sold or whatever." So I said, "Okay, your next book at least, kind of a thing, So it's not that it's just that I've not yet found the Indian book for me to adapt, but I'm sure it will come.
Hussein, now, I think it is happening with all of us that we are getting the books, the manuscripts before that. Is it helping? Do you think there's a change in the trend? Or
The manuscripts of the books,
the books before it publishes,
before it's
in the
published, yeah.
production houses, directors, producers.
As Shriram said that, now the directors and makers are wanting to, talk to the writers and say that we are interested in your next book. So in that case, they're already in talks, they already know the story premise. And that's how the writer, if there's an agreement between the two of them, he shares the manuscript. So I feel that if the story is not misused or it is not, put to any wrong purpose, then I think this is a nice idea. Manuscript should be shared so that a maker who takes, at least a year or so to develop that and take it to screen, it would be a very strategic step to do that.
Right. Sid, what do you look for when you are looking at a book? Because a lot of times it happens that it might not be written well, but we're looking at the core story, or the book is vast and we're adapting for film, but maybe now series there's an option. What are you looking for as a producer for your company? And you have got a mammoth book that you have option. So
that's actually an example of a manuscript that came to us earlier, right?
Right.
So basically, the Anarchy.
Yeah.
I read about the fact that this book was being written. It was a history of the East India Company. I was always been a fan of William Dalrymple. I got in touch with him and the publishers, got an advance copy, and was able to get the rights. But of course, that's a monumental undertaking. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. We're trying to set it up as a global project. But in that case, what I was looking for was the definitive story of sort of colonization and the first the first sort of corporate takeover of a subcontinent. We talk about Microsoft and Apple and Google today and talk about them as being sort of nation states in themselves. Here's an example of where it actually happened for the first time. So found it really relevant, and especially at a time when the whole world is going through this look at colonization, and there's sort of a cultural moment that's happening, which is re-looking at the entire like sort of era, and thought it was really relevant as a story to be told. So that's an example of in the case of that book. But in the case of like a film like Kaipoche, which was like based on 3 mistakes of my life, that again felt relevant in that moment because it was about an event that had occurred. It was still a very personal book.
That was a manuscript or book published?
That was a published book. So there it was about this personal story of 3 friends, right? But set against obviously really dire events that had happened in the recent, like sort of history. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly what one is looking for, because I think it strikes you when you read it and it tells you that, okay, it's sort of calling out to be told in the audiovisual medium. I also happened to see Guide on the weekend again after many years. And it's so amazing how at that time, in Indian cinema, you had grey characters. I mean, like in Indian commercial cinema, you had superstars allowing themselves to play grey characters. And I think that only happened because it came from a literary source. It would not have happened if it was done on spec. It happened because you had that material, and that sort of convinced the actors, convinced the director that no, there has to be an element of grey, however commercial we make it. So I think it's really important for us to look for, like Sriram said, the kernel of the story that you need to be told, and then the author has to allow themselves to believe that now they're giving it into someone else's hands. It will become something different. It will not stay exactly what it was, but it is a process of evolution from word to screen.
Since you both mentioned Guide, one fact that has always bothered me, that if somebody makes a list, I always check that. If you make a list of top 10 Hindi films, Bollywood films, and top 10 Hollywood films, 80% of the Hollywood films is adapted from the book. If you say Godfather, Apocalypse Now, Fight Club, but it was not the case in the earlier days, like Guide and counted few we can name. Do you think there's a reason to that? We didn't have a reading culture, or most of the authors were writing anyway the films? Because if you think of a Hindi favorite top 5 films, I doubt there are too many. Sholay, doubt there are few films which are adapted from the book.
No, yeah, I feel there have